not so much. Okay, good. I can just be myself then.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on Lisa's publication day for Secluded Cabin Sleeps Six, which has been described as your worst possible Airbnb experience, which I think is a really good tagline.
It is.
Yep. And Lisa writes different. I mean, they're essentially standalone stories. So a couple of you have asked me where you might start, and the truth is, you can read any one of her books, and that's fine. And you can read this book without having read any of the earlier books. But if you want to really get the full picture, you should try to read. How many of you have read Lisa's earlier books? I'm assuming that some of you have, or you wouldn't be here, right? Terrific. So do any of you have a favorite that you'd like to shout out for the benefit of new people? Confessions on the 745. Okay. Anybody else?
Oh, thank you.
Last
Thank
Girl
you so much.
Ghosted.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, all right.
Coming.
Right. So Lisa and I, over drinks and hummus at the Royal Palms, were talking about her earlier career. And Lisa actually began in publishing as a book publicist, which I did not know. So she's a veteran of what we're doing. But how does it feel to be on the author end of it as opposed to the publicity end of it?
Yeah, it's interesting because is this thing working? Am I good? Yeah. So I've always been a writer. I've never been anything. I never have thought about myself any other way. And of course, I was a reader first. My mom was a librarian, so I mean that's where all writers fall in love with story, right? In the pages of somebody else's book. And so I always wanted to be a writer. And when I asked my dad, who's an engineer, can I do this? Is this something that I can do with my life? And he basically said, no. Do not do that. That's not, people don't do that. Writing is not a real job, and you should think about getting a real job. And I was like, wow, okay. And so I did kind of believe him, even though I started my first book in when I was 19 years old. I was still in college, but when I graduated from college, I just did not have the confidence, not surprisingly, right, to pursue that goal. So I went into publishing, but I was always kind of a secret writer. I was always writing in the nooks and crannies of my life. And so that first book that I started when I was 19 years old, I was always kind of working on it, but just in secret. I was like a closet writer.
Did you have anything to say at age 19?
Not much.
Not much.
But it did take me 10 years to actually write the book. So over that decade, I did come up with a few things to say. And that actually was my first book that I published with St. Martin's Press, Angel Fire. But it took me, all this time because I was working in this big corporate job and it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And the time I spent writing just got smaller and smaller until I reached a point in my life where I wasn't writing at all. And I was like, well, you don't want to, you don't want to be in a place where the only thing that you've ever wanted to do with your life, you just let it slip away. And then 5 years, 10 years down the road, you're just going to have to look at yourself and say, you never even tried. You never even tried to do it. I couldn't live with that. I figured I could live with sort of a spectacular crash and burn failure, but not that. And that was those years in publishing, right? I mean, those are the years that taught me that it actually is a real job and that people do it.
People do it.
People do it.
Yeah.
So that's where I learned that, where I kind of got permission during those years to be, who I always was, I think.
Hilariously, we worked out that we worked together for 10 years because I started the bookstore in 1989.
Yeah.
And Lisa, when was it, 2000?
I left in 2000, but I started in book publishing in 1992 when I graduated from college.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we had a few years together that
Definitely.
and a different relationship than we currently have.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's great. I know. So, when you wrote your first 4 books under a different name. So when you moved to being Lisa Unger, what was the reason for that?
Yeah, so so my first 2 books were purchased by St. Martin's Press, and it was like a very small print run. It was like very small advance. It was basically like a nickel and a cheese sandwich, right? Like, so it was like a don't quit your day job advance. Unfortunately, I had already quit my day job, so it was time to, really step it up. And, it was okay because that was like the only thing I've ever wanted for my life. So when I got my first contract with St. Martin's, I was like, very, it was very much a dream come true. Sure. It was like, it was everything. So, and also from all my years, I knew that that first publishing contract is not necessarily a windfall. It's just an open door.
Have you read Agatha Christie's autobiography?
I have not.
She had like the worst publishing contract ever for her. And I'm serious. It was a really big deal. There are many, many authors who will tell you that just getting your foot in the door.
Just getting that, just being able to do that, right? Like just that open door to the writing life is like such a gift. Yeah. And there's a lot of work after that. And so I wrote 3 books for St. Martin's Press. And then in between the 3rd and 4th book in my series, I had this idea for another book. Mm-hmm. And I got a piece of junk mail, right? And on the junk mail, there was like, it was like one of those flyers. We probably all have received them. It's like an advertisement on one side. On the other side, there's a picture of a missing child. And in this case, it was an age graduated picture. And I looked at it and I said, to myself, what if I looked at this and recognized myself? And that was the seed for Beautiful Lies. So between the 3rd and the 4th book of my contract, I wrote Beautiful Lies. It was like a book that just wanted to be written. And it kind of wrote itself. It like wrote itself in a, great rush. And so my agent loved it. And of course we brought it to St. Martin's Press. So your publisher has what's called right of first refusal, which means that they have the right to reject your work before
everybody else can, right?
Exactly. And they did not want
Something
Beautiful
different.
Lies. They didn't want it. And my editor was like, we just don't want this. And we want you to write your 4th book in your series, which I did want to write, which I still loved writing my series. I had just also written this other book, but they didn't want it. And so my agent, Elaine Markson, she was like, you know what? It's okay. She's like, this book is special and we're going to find a place for it. In the meantime, write your 4th book. And so I did that. And so she started shopping around Beautiful Lies, and it was Sally Kim at Random House, Shea Earhart Books, as we were discussing earlier. And she was the one that picked up that book. But, Beautiful Lies was an evolution for me. It was a new kind of work for me. And so we, wanted to start publishing under my married name, Lisa Unger. And we figured that, we could just write to the 5 people that had bought the earlier books and let them know that I was writing under this name now. So that just sort of became, the evolution of my career. I became Lisa Unger, which was my married name. And then eventually those early books have been republished as Lisa Michonne, which is my maiden name, writing as Lisa Unger, or Lisa Unger writing as Lisa Michonne.
Just in case any of you were confused.
And
I
just
thought
in case
that would
anybody was
let you
confused, I'm sure it's all cleared up for you now. Good.
And so when you wrote Beautiful Lies, then as you've gone on, you haven't gone back to a series. You've really been interested in.
Yeah.
And is that, if you write a standalone book, one of the great things about it is everybody in the book is in jeopardy. You, the reader, have no guarantee that the characters you meet at the outset of the book are going to survive to the end. Whereas if you're writing a series, you're pretty sure that the series lead, Jack Reacher, is not going to die, at the end of the book. Right. And it's actually a different conversation that I have with authors writing series, because we can talk about some stuff that would be a real spoiler, if we're outside a series. But since we all know that Jack is going to, make it through.
He's going to make it through. We know that. We're sure
right.
of that. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. And I really, I have books that are kind of linked together. Like the first 4 books are a series, and then the, Beautiful Lies and Sliver of Truth are both with Ridley Jones. But, for me as a writer, it wouldn't be possible for me stay with one character and write that type of book where, I didn't that I knew what was going to happen every time. Like, I have to be so engaged with my characters and with my story, and I have to be I write for the same reason that I read, because I want to know what's going to happen to the people that are living in my head. And so if I don't have that joy and that excitement of discovery, and I'm not in that like very intense place that I like to bring my reader to, then I can't. I mean, where is the engine, right, for the year that you spend with those characters? Like, for me, I need that. I need that discovery and that excitement and that joy of creating and getting to know people on the page.
Plus, authors are very special. I had an interesting conversation with Claire McIntosh at 2:00 this afternoon, the last party, and she said other people see a beautiful lake in the in the Welsh countryside, and it's winter and it's cold, and you know that people are going to go swimming on New Year's Day to celebrate like they do on the Welsh side. She said other people look at that and think, "Wow, it's too cold to go swimming." I look at it and I say, "There's going to be a body floating up." And, and I think, we've talked about that if you're a mystery writer or a crime fiction writer, which is a better phrase, everywhere you look, there is the possibility of a crime or a discovery or something. It's a different way of looking at the world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's definitely, and I don't think it's like, I mean, I think that maybe your brain probably already works that way. I mean, at least that's true for me. I've always had this really dark imagination, like even as a kid. And I always, I'm like, I always think of myself as kind of like, you're at the movies and like, you're watching a horror movie and there's a noise in the basement and there's a girl going down to the basement. And everybody in the audience is like, don't do it. Don't go into the basement. But she goes in anyway. That's me. I'm the girl who wants to go into the basement and figure out what the noise is. And so that's sort of, kind of always the way my brain has worked. And so I think that's why I write thrillers. It's not like my brain started working a different way, and then, after I started writing, it was always that, like, and it's the same. Like, so Secluded Cabin, like, we go to a beautiful cabin in the woods, my family, and it's gorgeous, and it's, we're hiking and everything's beautiful, but all I can think about is like, so what about that lock code on the door? Does everybody get that same code, or is it new for everyone? And, just the isolation of it, it's just kind of like, your brain just starts spinning out these, my brain just starts spinning out these kind of really dark scenarios. And, if it doesn't land on the page, then what happens to it? It just drives you crazy, maybe.
It's probably better that you write it out than you act it out. Absolutely. All things considered, I can see that it could be. So, recently, the last couple of years, and I'm sure partly it's due to the pandemic, Agatha Christie has had a moment, not necessarily Agatha Christie herself, but the literary forms that she wrote for classic mystery have really made, have become really popular again. So we're seeing what Claire called this afternoon the closed cast mystery, but I call the English country house mystery. Yeah. And you can translate that to any location in which so many people, and only so many people, are inside a boundary, whether it's a room or a cabin on a ship or a theater or a rental cabin. And when a crime occurs, only those people can have committed the crime.
Right.
And, and then Poirot shows up, or Miss Marple, or whatever it is, and we go on from there. And it's a completely different structure than a thriller, which is basically the author starts you in some place and takes you on an adventure, on a ride, and you try to work out who's going to win, the good guy or the bad guy. So it's not, a thriller is about who's going to win, and a mystery in a more classic sense is about who did it and why did they do it. Right. And a locked room mystery, which I'm one of the reasons, because I think that term is misapplied to this book.
Absolutely
totally. Right. A locked room mystery is all about how it was done. And so the driving question in a locked room mystery is not who did it or why did it or who will win. It's how how did they do it? And the puzzle for the reader is to work out how a guy in a locked room with the fireplace blocked and shutters over the windows and the door locked on the inside and all, how did somebody kill him? That's the question. Right. And so when you see this book described as a locked room mystery, it's not. It's not. It's in fact an Agatha Christie is like the old guy with the fortune who's either A, going to leave it all to his stepson, or B, is going to marry an imprudently young woman or something, invites all of his relatives to his secluded castle in Scotland in a snowstorm so he can tell them what he's going to do. It's like, I'm holding up my hand, somebody kill me, right?
Yeah.
But this is different because, so tell us about how it all works out.
Okay, so I'll tell you about it. So Secluded Cabin Sleep Six was in part inspired by pandemic vacations that my family and I took to very beautiful cabins that I'm sure would have been wonderful for anybody else. I'm sure it would have been a lovely vacation. And in not only in the woods of Georgia, but also in the Asheville area. And some of those vacations were with my extended family. And I don't know if you've ever traveled with your extended family. Those trips can also be very inspirational. And so
to murder.
I didn't say that part. My mother might be watching. We don't know. Mom, it's okay. So we have these really, this feeling of like just isolation, which we wanted, or we thought we wanted, or we needed to have because of the pandemic. And, it was for somebody who's, we live in Florida, and I wouldn't exactly call it urban, but I am, like a New York City's in my past. And so I have that kind of like city vibe. So when you take, like, I'm never afraid in the city, like ever, but in nature, sometimes it's a little scary. Like there's like the sort of the imperviousness of the trees, right? They just kind of watch our folly. So that was part of it. And the other part of it was, for me, an ongoing obsession that I've had with DNA testing. So that was another thing that I've very curious about it. And so it's short of actually testing my own DNA, because I've done a little bit too much research to actually take a test myself. Yes, exactly.
Wow.
Right. So those were.
That's really a scary thought. Do you suspect something in your family?
Oh no, I'm not. No, no, I don't. I really don't. What I don't like is giving my data to a corporation. That's more. I'm more of a conspiracy theorist than thinking that anybody is gonna like anything interesting would happen in my family. Like, so I'm sure not.
You don't think you have a remote cousin that's a serial killer that they will track down?
Well, I mean, I think if there is a remote cousin who is a serial killer, like I'll probably find out about that somehow, right? Like the DNA will kind of lead back, right? So that's okay. That would be fine. I just don't want my corporations to have my private medical information. So, and that's sort of like, over the last few books, technology has played a big role in the stories and confessions on the 745. Social media was something that I looked at, and how con artists can use that to gain entry into your lives. In Last Girl Ghosted, it was online dating. But it's not really the technologies that interest me as much as it is how these technologies are rewriting the way we relate to each other. That's what interests me. Like there's a big theme through all of my work about identity and what makes us who we are. And this is, a very big piece of Secluded Cabin Sleep Six.
Absolutely. And in point of fact, well, the opening scenes at Christmas, you really make that very clear, because what happens?
Okay, so when we start Secluded Cabin Sleep Six, we gather for Christmas dinner with Hannah and her brother Mako, her husband, her brother's wife, and their daughter Gigi. And of course, it's an idyllic family gathering where everyone's happy and there's no dysfunction at all. At all. And it's perfect. And on the surface, it does look very nice, like all these sort of family gatherings do. But then at the end of the evening, behind the Christmas tree, Hannah's father discovers a stack of gifts that are wrapped, and they are from a secret Santa. And nobody in the family will take credit for having wrapped and put these gifts under the tree. And so when they hand out the gifts and everybody starts to open it, It's a box, and it's a foil box, and on the front of it, it says Origins. They're DNA tests for everybody in the family. So everybody gets one, and everybody has a different reaction. Some people are curious. Some people are, throwing their tests in the trash, and some people plan to take the test. And so, what could go wrong? It's gonna be fine.
Right. And so when is it they head off to the cabin in the woods?
Yeah, it's about 6 months later, and Hannah's brother Mako has, constructed this beautiful vacation. It's a grand gesture. He's like sort of the king of the grand gesture. He's a tech mogul. He's kind of larger than life, and he wants to take his sister Hannah, her husband, his wife, and their family friend Cricket, and her mysterious new boyfriend out to a secluded cabin in the woods to have a much needed disconnect from their very busy, addicted modern life. And so they all head out to the cabin, and they're all hauling with them a lot of baggage in the form of secrets and lies. And outside in the shadows is a watcher. And this stranger is running a dark agenda of revenge. And there's a storm brewing, and cell phone service is spotty. Cell phone service is spotty. And, again, what could go wrong?
But you raised a really important point, which is that to really isolate anybody, you have to find a way to kill off technology or social media.
Yeah.
And, the ubiquitous cell phone is a real problem. So you have to find a way to disrupt cell phone service. Not everybody can have their battery go out at the same time.
That's
so,
right.
Which is, or they're not underground,
That's right.
or whatever. So,
and that is actually one of the features of our trips to these cabins was that, there were these tremendous dead spots where your cell phone just didn't work.
Right.
And I found that very interesting. It was okay because, I had my child with me, but if I hadn't had her with me and I had not had, cell service, like as a mom, I would find that very terrifying. And, technology for me just plays a big part in all of my novels. You do need to disrupt it at some point in some way, but like it has so rewritten how we relate to each other, how we connect to each other. I mean, when I think about the way I ran around as a teenager, completely untethered, as it were, and the things that I did and got away with, my daughter is not gonna be able to do that. She's tracked. She's fully tracked, and it's a norm, right? Like this is a norm for all the kids know that they're being tracked. Like we have this like Life 360 app. We know where she's driving, how fast she's driving. There's like a feature on the app that would let us know if she had an abrupt stop, if there was an accident. And like, this is what we consider to be the norm now. This is a norm. And it's just, it's become a norm in such a short period of time, but those things are very interesting. Like to me as a writer, like watching that dot, like what is the potential for that? When your connection is cut, right? Like you expect to be able to reach your husband, reach your daughter, reach your mom, whatever, right? And like then once that phone goes away, that line is cut.
Yeah, but it's exhausting. I was thinking that I'm never, as a small business owner, I am never not working anymore.
That's true.
There are no vacations wherever I am. When I was in French Polynesia, I'm in Bora Bora, on a yacht, and I'm still like answering email or whatever it is. You can't, and I think back to when I was a child. I used to hop on my bicycle at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, and I would come home at dinner time.
Yeah.
Nobody knew where I was. I was down at Lake Michigan in the water. I was out in the Skokie Lagoons. I was, and we didn't think about, predators or accidents or
of course.
We were, and I think being a feral child is a great gift. Yeah. I'm convinced that's one reason that I have aged as well as I have because, I've had tons of exercise.
Yes.
We ate real food.
Yes, of course.
You know,
Yeah.
we
All
weren't
that stuff.
sitting hunched over things all day and looking
Exactly.
at our screens and all
Exactly
the
right.
rest of it.
Yeah.
And that
Agree.
privilege is gone.
Yeah, it is a little bit gone. And it's an interesting evolution. And it's also an interesting evolution as I see it, like, technology. If you think about how technology has evolved over the last 20 years, the amount of change that has taken place in the technology in our lives, the computing power that we have in the phone that we carry in our hand, like the exponential growth is absolutely shocking. However, our brains have evolved not at all, like in a millennia. Right? And yet we're still asked to process all this information, right? We're still asked to have this phone in our pocket that's, it's your email, it's your text, it's your book, it's your radio, it's your tracking device for your child, it's your alarm system in your home, it's all of it. And it's just the evolution of the device, but and we have adapted to it, but how is that changing our relationships? So that's the thing that interests me in fiction, is how does this technology, it's not, for me it's not a burden, like how do I get rid of the cell phone, it's like another avenue that I can like spelunk into, like how is this changing the way we relate to each other, how we communicate with each other.
Which means, of course, you have to keep up with technology as it's evolving.
Yes.
So, are you on Book Talk? Are you emulating Colleen Hoover, for example?
Oh my gosh. Well, I am okay. So I am on Book Talk, sort of. I have a TikTok account, but it's being managed by my husband. I'm sorry. He probably wouldn't want me to tell you that, but he is managing it. And I said to him the other day, I was like, my TikTok is being managed by a 54-year-old man, and it shows. It really shows. But he basically repurposes all of it. I do a lot of video stuff for, Instagram and all that. Like we're very on top of it. It can be fun and creative. It can be overwhelming and, soul crushing. It can be all of these things. But yeah, so that he basically repurposes my videos for TikTok. So like, it's totally not working. Like I'm not like I'm not like a TikToker at all, but I am on there. So if you're interested, go on TikTok and just, throw some likes in the direction of my husband, because it means a lot to him. It really does.
Mine is also caught up in it, and yet we're selling out to the Chinese. We actually know that this is a Chinese-owned company, and we are giving them free access to data and to us while we do it.
Yeah, I mean, the implications are huge.
They really are.
They are. And all of this stuff is, like, even the DNA testing, the implications of that are gigantic. Probably most people know about the forensic detectives who, have used these sort of, the lay DNA tests to submit stored, criminal DNA evidence. And so that's recently been ruled unconstitutional, because there is no permission given that if I were to submit my DNA and they had some DNA somewhere from a serial killer, my distant cousin, the serial killer, if they had that DNA stored and they put it into 23andMe and I turned up as a match as a cousin, and they came to me to say, hey, do you know this guy? Or is your cousin a serial killer? Like, that's not really fair. I signed up because I wanted to know, whether my parents really came from Italy. And instead I found out that I have, a cousin who's a serial killer. So like, that's not really constitutionally fair. So it has been ruled unconstitutional, but it's very interesting that, that it's that kind of it's that kind of web, it's that kind of network of information. And then, certainly corporations have not earned our trust, right? Like, so that to turn over the data to them, maybe at the in this moment, that's perfectly fine. But when regimes change, rules change. So what's 10 years from now? How is that data used?
I read the other day that 10 years from now, households will have robots working in their homes, and I'm thinking, not me. I'm still going to clean my house myself. There's no way I'm going to have a robot. And, every time we get a security system or whatever it is in our house, we are giving up all kinds of access. I mean, you can't hack a front door key, but you certainly can, on automatic.
That's right.
So, I'm staying very low tech because I just don't want to do all that.
Yeah.
Actually, I think in the DNA testing, what really has been upsetting to an awful lot of families is finding out that your father isn't who you thought he was, or your mom, gave away a child, or all kinds of. It's done some real structural damage to families, emotional damages.
Absolutely. And I read a book called The Lost Family that is really all about that. And the author of this book posits basically that if you submit your DNA to one of these places, the chances are you're going to find out something that surprises you. And once you know it, you can't unknow it. So
in Secluded Cabin Sleeps Six, indeed, you might suspect that if everybody got a DNA kit and even one person submitted it for testing, that maybe there will be a surprise.
There might be. Just saying.
And that's really all we can say about it, because otherwise we'll wreck it for you.
We just ruin it.
But we didn't get a chance to talk to you about your earlier books. So tell us a little more about Last Girl Ghosted and Confessions on the 745, because most people here have probably read them by now.
Yeah, so Confessions on the 745 actually has just been optioned by Netflix. Yeah, so Jessica Alba read Confessions on the 745, and her production company brought it to Netflix, and we have a script. So I'm waiting to see the script. So, as you know, we'll see what happens from here, but it all seems to be moving in the right direction. And so Confessions on the 745 is kind of loosely inspired by Strangers on a Train. It's just like that, only really just that moment of like two strangers meeting, and is it a chance encounter, is it not, what is the electricity of that moment of meeting, and how does it how can it unstitch your life. So that's really Confessions on the 745. And
can you hold up your mic?
Sorry. Yeah. And Last Girl Ghosted is about a young woman who's an advice columnist, and she comes from like a very dark past, and she has sort of white knuckled her way into the light. She's living a life that she loves, except that she doesn't have any love in her life. And so her best friend Jax kind of pushes her into the world of online dating. And Jax, I know, pushes her into the world of online dating. And she has some underwhelming encounters. And then she meets Adam. And when she meets Adam, she falls for him very hard. And they have like a whirlwind romance. And after a particularly romantic evening, he asks her, he says, "Tell me something that you've never told anyone." And she does. And the next day, he ghosts her. He disappears. His social media profiles disappear. His phone is disconnected. The place where she thought he lived is just a vacation rental. And so she's, crushed. She's devastated. And then a detective comes to her door, and he tells her that, she's not the first person to fall in love with Adam, and that all the other girls that have are missing. And so instead of like sort of licking her wounds, she decides that, she's going to follow his very dark digital trail, and that she's going to be the last girl ghosted. And that's that. Yeah.
So that's her decision, because, you could read that title a different way, exactly. But, she decides this is enough, and she's going to be the last one he does it to.
Exactly right.
Right. Yeah. Now, I think they're really fascinating books. So I always like to give your readers hope that there will be a new book. So are you, it's always good to end on a positive note, right? Yeah. Before we ask questions. So do you have any little hints about what may be coming next?
Well, I can never talk about it. I just can't. I can't talk about it until it's done.
A book coming next?
It is. If there is a book coming, it's done. It's in editorial right now. So we're very close to, being, I'm just going to be doing one more draft maybe, and then it'll be sort of into production. So yes, there's another book coming. It will it will be a psychological thriller. Bad things will happen, and I hope that it keeps you up way past your bedtime turning the pages. So that's the best I can do on that one.
It's fine. I mean, I just think it's good to know that there's a book actually
Yes.
done.
Yes.
I regret to tell you, watched how cold-blooded readers can be because they get invested in an author and then the author dies or quits, and it's really well, recently that's true, but that didn't used to be the way. But readers can be extraordinarily selfish, and it isn't that they necessarily mourn the author, but they want to know, that's
they want to know, is there another one? Is there
no, they
another one
want the
coming?
character to live. That's the thing. They really,
do.
especially if it's a series,
Yes.
they just can't bear the thought that that's all you're going to know about this character.
I know. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing. It's like the relationship that your readers have with your books and your characters it's a completely separate relationship than you have with your book and your characters. Right. Yeah, and it's it's important, I think, to honor that most of the time.
Right. Well, the truth is that everybody reads a book differently. Each one of you will read this book and have a different experience doing it.
Yeah.
And I find it so interesting that, especially because we're about to do that, we get to the question part. Sometimes I see authors getting this kind of dazed look in their eye, and they go, "Is that really what you got from my book? Or did I say that?
Did I say that? Did that happen?"
Yeah, no, I know. It's really, but I think that's the point of the storytelling. Storytelling is that people get to make it impart their own story.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole relationship that your reader has with your books that, it's such a special thing. You write your book and obviously you bring everything that you can to the novel, but you as a professional writer, a writer who knows that their work is going to be published, that there's another life for that book in the hands of every reader. Everybody is gonna have a different experience with that book because of what they bring to it, and that's part of the magic of this work.
We had a wonderful writer years ago named Robert Eversys who said a really true thing. I often quote it. He said, every book really exists in three forms. There's the platonic form that's in the author's head before they write it. It's perfect.
Yes.
This is going to be the perfect book.
Right.
And then there's the book the author actually writes, which is not necessarily the platonic book that they first conceived of.
Right.
But then there's the book that every reader reads. And I think it's important, to remember that you start out hoping the book will be, or maybe you don't. If you're a real pantser, you don't have any idea what the book's going to be.
That's me. I don't have any idea. Yeah.
So you plunge in.
You plunge in with faith. You listen to your characters. For me, it's always, a couple of things. Like in this case, it was the cabins and the DNA and like my ongoing obsession with those types of things. And then if it connects with something deeper that's going on with me, then I start to hear a voice or voices. And it's those voices that that carry me through the manuscript. I follow those voices, and it's an act of faith. Like after all these years of writing novels, like I believe that if I have that feeling and I hear those voices, that there's a story there, and I'm going to find it. And very often, it's it's a long relationship. It's a relationship over a year at least, right? With trying to, find your way into the story and to make the story the best that it can be. And so there's that first draft in like 9 months to 12 months for me. And then, then it goes to your editor, so for me, there's like multiple drafts. I might do a draft and then put it aside and then go back and do 2, maybe 3 drafts before I ever turn it into my editor. And when I turn it into her, I know that it is the pinnacle of my ability, right? Like it's the best that I can do. And then it goes to my editor and it comes back and there's an editorial phase. And that
it wasn't the best you could do,
no,
Lisa.
It was, but that's when I make it the best that it can be. In the editorial phase, like that's where you bring it to the reader, right? Because when you write it in and it's yours and nobody else has read it, then it's one thing. And then when your editor reads it, especially if you have a good relationship with your editor and she's somebody that you trust and and that that she gets you, and she too wants the book to be the best that it can be. That's the space where you really bring it to the next level, or try to.
So when you say you write multiple drafts, how do the drafts differ? I mean, what is it you do with the second draft that's different, and what do you do with the third draft?
So when I'm done with the book, I might put it aside for, I don't know, maybe a couple days, never more than a week. And then I go back and I start to read. I just read from page one. And so a lot of times my first draft is going to be, I don't know, let's say 90,000 words. That second draft is probably going to be 100,000 words. Right. So I add. I'm structurally, most of the time, structurally, we're about 95% there in that first draft. Like, because it evolves for me on the page the way it does for the reader, like that structure is solid. Right. So for me, it's about flushing out, making things understandable, digging deeper, working on the writing, making sure everything is exactly the way I want it said, deeper into character, revealing more about the story in different ways. So for me, it's always adding. But then, then in the editorial process, you may take stuff out, but I'm still always adding. I know my editor wish I was like cut more, but I'm like, well, yeah, I did. I cut 8,000 words, but then I wrote 10.
Very often, editing or rewriting is about taking out.
Yes.
As Elmore Leonard famously said, I take out the words that readers skip. And very often, first drafts have too many words,
right,
and or repetitions, and so the whole deal is about cutting.
Right.
But
like
you're interesting if you're
I know.
fluffing it, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if fluffing
Expanding. Let me say expanding.
I like expanding better.
Expanding is a kinder word, right?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know if you had questions. You're just doing a photo. Patrick is monitoring the streaming, so he may have online. We had a really lively group the other night. Gosh, yeah, we had all kinds of people asking questions. Yeah. You got any tonight's? Okay.
How do you name your characters?
Okay, I'm just going to say it, and it always sounds really weird, but my characters come with their names. Like, I don't name characters. I feel like a long time ago, I stopped thinking about characters as people that I create and started thinking about them as people that I meet. And so they come with their names, and I'm very attached to those names. And there have been some times where I've had to change the names, once for legal reasons, and I did that because I had to, but I never stopped thinking about that character with a different name.
It was always Bruce.
It was always Bruce or whatever. Like, I can't, it's very difficult for me to do that. Like, and also, writers do a thing where, you donate a name, and I did that once, and it was brutal for me, because I just I couldn't make a character and give it a name. Like, it had to come with a name. And once it was a pet, like somebody wanted me to name a pet in my book after their pet, and even that was really hard. So I don't do that. I don't do that anymore. I don't auction off names anymore. It's just a thing. It's an ism. No, that's their name. It's like, I can't all of a sudden. What if I just started all of a sudden calling you like Louise or something? Like, I can't do that. Your name is Barbara. Like, I can't think of you as anything else.
I actually changed from my middle name to my first name when I went to high school. I hated my middle name. I was Judy.
Oh.
And it's a good thing I did it, because my brother subsequently married a Judy. So there would have been.
You go.
But I never felt like a Judy. And so when I went to my first name actually is Barbara. My father, till the day he died, called me Judy.
Yeah.
He could never
He could never get over
Judy.
it.
He could never. And I understood that. I was never mad at him,
Right.
because
It's just like a thing. You just, you just like, it's so integrated for some reason. But so I kind of feel that way about my character names.
You bet. What Lisa was talking about is that one way to raise money for charity is that authors will often agree that it's called naming rights. And people can bid, and the high bidder gets to then have the author name a character or a pet, which is interesting,
Right.
in the book after them. And once I can remember, I don't even know how it happened, but I was reading a book by Judy Van Giesen, and there was like a abandoned car on the side of the road, and the cops are reading off the license plate. I thought, that's a really familiar number. And then I realized it was mine. And I wrote to her, and she said, I'm sorry, I saw it in the parking lot. I just borrowed it. And there have been some odd
That's so
instances where people have, authors have put in phone numbers.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it's a real one for somebody, and that can get really. I was fine with Judy. It was just funny, but phone numbers have actually caused some real problems.
Yeah, and it's weird too. And you do wind up like, sort of altering those or like not putting numbers in your book.
It's almost impossible to generate one anymore that isn't a real phone number. It's really hard to do that.
Right. Right. Exactly.
See, Diane would like to know, will there be more hollows?
Oh yeah. So the Hollows is my fictional town, and it always conspires to get itself into every book. So you'll almost always find like at least a Hollows cameo in most of the books. I don't. I think that there is going to be another Hollows book because like I never stop thinking about the Hollows, and there are certain characters that I know have more to do and more to say. I just don't know when that book is going to be. So stay tuned. Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's time to celebrate yet. I will let you know when it's time to celebrate.
Cash the check. That's what you did. Yep.
When I cash it, yeah, exactly. It was like a trip to the bank. Yay. When I'm ready to celebrate, everybody is going to celebrate with me. We're going to have like a fun party and a watch party and all that stuff. But when it's time to celebrate, I won't be celebrating alone.
Well, Lisa's a good friend of Karen Slaughter who can lead the way,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
So I expect terrible and evil things from you and Karen.
Oh, well, of course. I mean, that goes without saying.
She is the new, I just saw that there was a thing about Will Trent, the first.
Yeah.
I saw a photo of it, and I thought, how wonderful.
I know. It looks really cool. Yeah. So I think I think that Karen's new show, the Will Trent Show, is going to be on ABC, and also I think it's going to stream on Hulu, something like that. Yeah. 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 It might not be. Well, he could be kind of like an other Will Trent, like a sexy TV Will Trent.
That is a hazard, if you've got, that's why they don't often put real faces on characters on book covers, because people want to imagine them. And, it's a danger for authors sometimes to listen to their audiobook narrator, because then that voice gets in your head and, you can't necessarily get away from it. So, there are... and also there's something about TV where people start with ownership and then actors kind of take ownership of the author's story.
Yes.
Yes, I've seen that. I've seen that happen.
I think Mike Connolly talks about that. Which one was it? With Bosch, but not the current one, but he talks about, maybe it wasn't Bosch, it was some character that, had a movie or a television show, and he couldn't reconnect to that character. Do you remember which one it was?
Yeah, I think it was Clint Eastwood in Bloodwork.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, and Michael's solution to that was he killed the character in the next book. It really is. We've talked about that. Michael's, we've done his entire career together, and I can remember that all too well. No, he really likes Titus Welliver, and I noticed that Welliver is narrating. Michael will be here tomorrow night. I noticed that Titus Welliver is narrating Desert Star, the audiobook, which I thought was really interesting.
That is really
because I'm not sure that he has done that all along.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
So, do you all have questions? What would you like to ask?
Hi. I mean, you really don't, so I was involved very early on before they started writing the script. We had like some kind of, serious conversations about structure. Confessions on the 745 is, it's an interesting, it's like a dual timeline. Some of the characters evolve and grow from children into adults. And so there's there's a lot of layers to it that they wanted to ask how would I want to see it on a screen? Like, would it be flashbacks? Would it be a dual timeline? Would it be something like that? So there were a lot of early conversations. And then when the script is done, I'll see the script. It'll be it's either going to be a 6 or an 8-part limited edition series. And so I'll see that, it'll come to me, and I'll make my notes, and I'll send my notes back, and they'll completely ignore those notes. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think you do kind of have to, you have to understand that the book belongs to you. The book is mine. I wrote the book. The television show or the movie is going to be another entity, and I'll have whatever limited involvement I'm allowed to have, but it will not entirely be mine. And I think you have to kind of accept that.
Well, for one thing, it's a group of writers that write a script.
Right.
It's called the writer's room.
Yeah.
And additionally, the actors have input. And who was it I was just talking to that said, I'm trying to think, it was so funny. He said he was listening along to whatever they were doing. The actor said, put out some line that said, my character would never say that. And the author's going, yes, they would. I wrote it.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So you have to,
it's another artist sensibility on the work. I mean, it's not dissimilar from what we were saying about the reader.
Yeah.
The reader has a relationship. The screenwriter is going to have a relationship with your book and how she wants to see it on the screen. The people who are acting are going to have a relationship to the character that they're acting. And, you have to have, I think, respect for that, respect for other people's artistic vision. And if you don't want to respect it, then you shouldn't sign your rights away.
And sometimes there are physical limitations. Diana was telling me she went off to do an Outlander thing in Scotland, and she had written a scene in a particular way for a particular room, but in the place where they were filming it, the room wasn't like that. It was a different structure, and there wasn't any way to overcome that. So things had to change. So sometimes, it has to do with the location as well, or the landscape, that you have to conform, to that too. So there's so many different things that come into play.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of cool. It's interesting when you hear the audio, when I listen to the audiobook, like I find that very interesting, to hear how a reader reads the book. Again, it's another version of the book. It is what I wrote, of course, but there's another layer to it, even in the audiobook.
Well, that's really true. And, just to finish this up, any of you watch Shetland? Anne Cleves has written, it's a wonderful series. And she said all she had to say about those characters in 7 books. And the series went on, and I said to her, are you okay with that? And that's what she said to me. She said, I said what I had to say about Jimmy Peros and all, and now he has a life of his own.
Right.
And it'll go on. Actually, unfortunately, it went on this season, and then, it's retiring. But they did, I think, 2 seasons where she had no participation at all. It wasn't based on books she'd written. So sometimes they can take on a life of their own. The story can go on outside of anything that you have written.
Yeah. And I think there's something cool about that.
Yeah.
I might feel differently if I hated something that somebody made, but I don't think so. I think you just have to respect, another artist's vision of the work.
Right. You had questions?
Yeah, it has. I do. I generally get auditions. Like I'll get multiple actors or voiceover artists who will audition for the book. And but over the last I think the last 4 books have been narrated by the same woman of a woman named Vivian Lahaney. And she's amazing. She is so great. So now I just say, please, can we have Vivian again? And she also loves reading the book, so she's always asking for them as well. So as long as she's willing to do the books, I'm happy to have her do it. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Yes, all of them. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it might be. It might be. I mean, it is really a specialized skill. And I think that I think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think a lot more nonfiction writers read their work. You know, maybe if it's a memoir or something like that, maybe it's easier to access that voice. But I personally would never do it. I mean, I'm sure you would not want to hear me read my book aloud for whatever it is, 8 hours, 10 hours. Like, I don't think that I have that particular skill. And there are so many people that are doing it so well that I think I would defer to those very talented people. Hmm. It's true. It's true. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I just know that I don't have that skill. So I wouldn't try to force myself into that process. And all of a sudden audiobook sales like they decrease by 90% as soon as I start reading my own novels. But I think that so many people are doing it so well. And again, it's another moment where you have to respect that artistic version of the work. But I mean, it's pretty in most of the cases I've never listened to an audiobook or listened to any audio version of any of the work that I've done and been upset or offended or felt like, oh god, they did not get that at all. But like, I mean, I just and I don't spend hours listening to my own audiobooks either. So, so maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's why I'm so happy with it.
Right. Put it aside. Right.
Exactly.
All right. Is there a final question? Ah,
Yeah. Yeah, my golden creative hours are 5 a.m. to noon. Like those are my best hours. I try to get up and write as early as possible. I like to be as close to my dream brain as I can get. And so the ideal situation is that I basically just kind of wake up and like roll over to my computer and start writing. That's the best case scenario. Of course, I'm a mom and I have a dog, and that doesn't always happen. But that real important block for me every day is from about 6:30 to 7 o'clock to noon. Like those that block is very important to me as a writer. But I'm a professional writer. I can write anywhere. I can write under pretty much any circumstances. I could write in the car. I could write with the television on. If I'm in the zone, it really does not matter what's going on. I can, and sometimes towards the end of a book, especially, there's a very intense phase of writing, and then it might be all day. It might start in the morning, and I might still be writing after dinner. So, as I approach the end of the book, it becomes much more intense. But as a main, sort of staple of my writing life, it's those early morning hours that are the most critical. Yeah.
anyone
Talked about technology earlier.
Yeah.
A lot of technology holds us hostage, and because if you don't follow it, you don't keep up with it,
Right.
you lose personal freedom.
It's
In a
true.
sense.
It's true. You're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, you are kind of beholden to it. I mean, you do have to participate in technology to a certain extent. It's like just try to give up your smartphone. Like that, right. I mean, you don't have maps. use like you can't control your alarm. It's like
Well, you can,
you
but
can.
I'll tell you what you can't do is you
Right.
can't travel. If you don't have a smartphone today,
Right.
you cannot travel. There is
Right.
no way to go through an airport or do anything that
Yeah.
is.
Right. Right. You're like, we gotta get
Yeah.
back to the hotel.
But I'm just talking about the technical part of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That's probably true
Yeah.
for ticketing now. And actually,
I
yeah,
mean,
there
you can do it, but you're countercultural, and like there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with being countercultural. Like sometimes you should be countercultural.
I'm happy to be countercultural in an airport. I want an
That's right.
actual paper
An
ticket.
actual vote.
But
Right.
at the same time,
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually did print up a paper boarding pass and I always do, just to have it, because I feel like, what if the phone doesn't work? What if it runs out of juice or whatever?
Every once in a while, I think it's just going to blow up on me. And
Yeah,
there
exactly.
I'm
It's just
gonna
gonna
be.
burst into flames. You're like, oh my God.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult. It's rewritten the way we relate to each other. It's rewritten society and how society works.
Yep.
And you can be countercultural, and you can move away from your smartphone, but you're gonna be giving things up, and it's always going to be something that you have to explain. Why don't you do this? Why aren't you doing this? Why don't you have this?
But if you're going to do a criminal act, leave your phone home.
Sure.
Because one of the biggest ways people get caught is that they, look at the January 6th riots, for example. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Put yourself on Facebook. I was there,
I was
It's
there.
great. I could be, ma'am, yes, you had a question. Let's take that as the final one.
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I've been like a literary omnivore, sort of all my life. I've read wildly across genre. I could point to inspiration from, Jane Austen or V.C. Andrews, like Stephen King, and the Bronte sisters, Tolkien, Heinlein. Like, just, it doesn't even matter what the genre is. Like, especially as a kid, my mom was a librarian. We had shelves and shelves of books. There was no censorship at all. Like, if I could reach it, I could read it, so I was reading things that were wildly inappropriate for my age from the time I was really young. But like, I think that I always have to come back to Truman Capote. Truman Capote was where I fell in love with language as a kid, like in his short stories, like the other voices, other rooms, and music for chameleons. Like the way he was able to, some of it's fiction, some of it's like, vignettes from his life, but the portraits that he was able to sort of paint of pictures of people, and the, like how he seemed to have his like finger on the pulse of like sort of the very sad, frail human heart. Like I really fell in love with language in Truman Capote's short stories. And then it was In Cold Blood, which is really the first, true crime book ever written, where I felt like I was given permission to be who I am as a writer, that you could look into the darkness, but that you could do it with empathy and with beauty and, compassion. And so that I always have to point to Truman Capote as being one of my major influences.
Well, I want to thank you all very much for coming out this evening. Please do not use your smartphones to update us this moment. I'm really serious.
Don't get your DNA tested.
No, don't do that.
Check the lock code on your rental cabin.
Right. On your way home, crash your car as you're looking at the election results, but don't do it here. Thank you very much, virtual audience, for joining us. And if you'd like to get a book signed, and I would like to say that my favorite fan is not on the aisle tonight. Why is she over there on the side?
Can she come?
Oh, come on. There she is.
Oh.
There, and she's got her top knot.
Oh, my goodness.
Isn't she adorable?
Oh, my goodness. A little Muppet.
I know. Come on, baby.
Hi.
That's a good girl. Hi. Yeah. Hi. Yes, I know. I have Puppy all over me. Right.
Oh, she's so sweet. What is Vivi, huh?
Isn't she a sweetheart? And she's
God.
so
kind of
good.
What kind of a dog are you? Havanese.
Yeah.
Oh, you're so beautiful.
I love her hairdo. I mean, wouldn't it be great just to like have a barrette and have your hair flower out like that.
my
It's so
goodness.
great.
Oh my goodness, you have to see this.
Somebody took your barrette out recently at one of our events.